I better click back over here. If you're ever in doubt if you are still logged in or not, just click on a different tab or click update and you'll find out whether you're still logged in. Again, I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. Well, actually, I'm going to do this 2 steps. I'll walk through this slowly. I'll end up having to log back in. I'll make the changes kind of quickly and then update it and then come back and show you the screen again for, if you need to take notes on them or review them. So again, we have up at top the admin password. The other one said this as well. It's purposely not displayed for security protection. So it doesn't even give you asterisks. So you don't even know if it's 5 characters or 10 or whatever. Unfortunately, this is the password you use to log into your phone. If you forget it, you can't just come in here and change it because you wouldn't get this far if you forgot your password. The only way to fix that is to reset the phone to factory reset, to factory settings. If you do that, you lose all your settings. So your time zone, your account information, your IP address, and everything. So you might want to document this stuff, what you have where. It's a good idea anyway. Part of any kind of installation of any kind of system is to always document your settings and procedures for everything. So all of you are taking copious notes. Good. Excellent. There's a couple things that we're not going to even talk about. Some rates, silent suppression, blah, 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 blah. This is under the advanced settings, by the way. One thing we will talk about, though, is the firmware upgrade and provisioning. The firmware server path, this is like an old way of doing it, and they've upgraded the firmware path for a long time. And this is where you can actually get the new software. And I'll come back to that after I show you the rest of the screen because I'm sure I'm going to time out before then. And so we'll enter the actual firmware path and be able to do an upgrade. So if you're not on that 1.253 or whatever, it's going to go out and download the latest version from their firmware server and install it automatically. The next part is automatic updates, and it says no. And you can change this to yes. What's going to happen is it's going to check for automatic updates every 7 days. And it's going to, if it's a new one, it's going to automatically download it. That's just like Windows Update. So it goes out there on a weekly basis, checks for updates, and then downloads and installs them. We're going to have this on during class, just, if there are new updates during this course of the course. That will update automatically. It's probably not going to happen. They don't come up with updates very often. In fact, it's been probably a year or two. It's much more of a firmware type thing. How many times does your firmware for your motherboard change? Not very often, maybe 6 months, a year, maybe longer if it's an older device, and maybe never again. The scary part about this, kind of like the scary part of Windows updates, is it's just going to install it, and you don't know if the new software is going to work or not. And all of a sudden, all your phones are set to automatic update, and they update to a version that doesn't work, or it ends up messing up some of your other settings. Now you have an entire phone system that's down. So typically, even in an enterprise situation, you don't want them to automatically update or check for updates. This option down here is always check for new firmware is when you boot it up. And so it's always going to be looking. If you noticed, it's looking out and it's trying to download things during the boot process. That's what it's doing, is always checking for new firmware. So if you really were concerned about that in the enterprise area, you could click no for automatic updates and then skip the firmware check. If I want to update you, I'll come back in, and do the checks, manually and saying, hey, check for Windows updates. No, check for phone updates. But we'll leave this for yes and yes. And again, we'll come back and change that. There's some phone book XML downloads. If you notice that there was a phone book feature on your phone, it's an XML. It can be an XML file. You can download it. You can pre-populate things for people. You come up with the phone book file, and then you just download it every time you reboot the phone, and it gives them, the updated list of addresses. We are not using the phone book features on the phone. That's like your home phone or your cell phone where it's private, that you're the only person that's using it. It's kind of frustrating. You have a phone at home with the phone book, and it's only that phone. And then you have another like cordless phone, or you have a cell phone, and none of them really match or whatever. That's what this is. We're going to be using the phone book off of a server. And when we get to that point, so we don't need this at all. Let's see what other things can we skip. We can skip this. Distinctive rings, system ringtones. By the way, these are all frequencies. 350, was it kilohertz, I think? No, it can be kilohertz. Hertz, 350, whatever your frequencies are that you can hear. Oh, they are in hertz. Frequencies are in hertz. So 480 hertz, 25 hertz. So you can make your own if you want by actually, if you know the frequencies of what you want to have. Then we have lots of yes and no questions down here. Disable call waiting. Call waiting, you know, if another call comes in, I can disable that. I don't want to have call waiting. I can disable the call waiting tone, so the little beep that says there's call waiting going on. Disable direct IP calls. Remember that time that you were directly calling each other, like right off the bat? That's what direct IP calling is, and you can disable that. I don't want my users, you know, calling each other directly using the IP address. Maybe I want to monitor or control, or, you know, it's the same thing in a network. You know, you can disable peer-to-peer network file sharing, and that's sort of the same thing. So we're not going to do that. Use quick IP mode call. There's a shorthand for IP calling, which we will enable when we come back to this. And then disable conference calling. Conference calling is able to talk to multiple people at the same time. You can disable that if you want. You can lock the keypad update. If you notice the menus, there's a way of doing an update through the phone itself by hitting the menu, the up and down arrows, config, and doing update. Do you really want your users to be able to just update their own phone by themselves? Maybe you don't want to. Enable MPK sending DTMF. I'm not even sure what that is. Disable the DND button. That's do not disturb. The mute delete button pressing will have no effect if set to yes. The mute delete button is the DND, or the do not disturb button. If your phone system supports do not disturb, that's the button that you push, and then your phone goes into a completely silent mode. So if somebody calls you, you know, goes right to voicemail, or it just gets forwarded someplace else. It just does not ring there. Transferring, I can take my phone and transfer it, you know, from one extension to another. I can disable that if I want. I don't know what multicast filter is, or constraint mode. And then we have different standards, RFC 5589. There's all kinds of RFC stuff going on here. And I'm not sure what those are. You can have headset gains. You can make them louder for transmitting and for receiving. If somebody says, oh, you're like really, really soft, you can actually make it softer or louder for them. And same thing for listening. You can do that. By the way, on the phone itself, you can adjust the volume just by using the arrow keys to do that. So I'm sure that I timed out. But before I do that, let me go back to the screen here. To show you some of the volume functions right on the phone itself is while the phone's on the, oh shoot, I do have to change this. It has different phones in a different way. If I go to config and I go to, no, hang on, sorry. Preferences, ring volume. I can use the left and right arrow keys to make it louder and softer. So you can do that right. And the user can just do that on their own. They don't have to log in and make those changes that way. If I take my phone off the hook, so let me just show this to you so you can see it. If I take my phone off the hook and now I use the up and down arrow keys, if you notice right in here, it's changing my volume of the in-call volume. So it's just like, oh, I want it louder, they're kind of soft. It's like, oh man, they're like really loud. You can turn it down, or I don't want to listen to them. I can turn it all the way on mute. So if you can see that, you hit the up and down arrow keys to be able to change the in-call dialing. I thought there was it. The other phones let you change the ring volume right for those up and down as well, but this one does not. So, okay. going back. Click on bases. Okay. So coming in, and we're just going to make those changes that we just talked about. And I'm going to go through kind of quickly, but I'll give you a chance to review it after I click update. So coming down, admin password, payload, entries. The first thing we're going to end up changing is the firmware server path. And it is actually going to be, they just changed it, and it is, oops, I have to click in here. It is called firmware.grandstream.com. And again, I'm just going to go kind of quickly through here. It is not the config server. That's something completely different. We won't even be using a configuration server. So it's only the firmware server path that we're changing. And I'll come back to this. Automatic upgrade, sure. We're going to enable this just for the class. So it's going to check every week for a new one. And then every time it boots, it's going to look for a new update as well. Skip the phone book, skip the rest of these things through here, and down to the yes and no questions. We're going to keep everything no, so we're not going to disable anything. It's kind of backwards sometimes. We have disable this, and we use this, so you really have to read the question. And I do want to enable the quick IP mode, because it's just another way of working with IP calling. And then I click update. And those were, in fact, advanced features or functions, so I am going to reboot for that. Correct. In fact, I'm going to put that up on this page as well. So we get a hold of that. Okay, under
always check for new firmware.
This one here, under automatic updates, yes, check upgrades every week, and then always check for new firmware. So I didn't change this one. I just changed this one to yes. And then the only other thing that I'm changing on the screen so far is, in fact, this one, use the quick IP calling for yes. So this would just be just like a computer. You set it up, you get the operating system, you then can give it an IP address, you do some other configurations that meet your specific needs and wants, and then you're sort of ready to use it. Any questions so far? Okay. Okay. Working back with the phone itself. So what I've done is I have enabled, I did not disable the direct IP calling, and you already took a look at those. So if you hit the menu button and then you arrow down to direct IP call, you hit enter and you have an IP address. Now what's nice about this is that you can hit any other IP phone in the world directly. So if you know their IP address, you can connect to it. Unfortunately, many networks, LTCs included, is behind a firewall, is behind network address translation, so it's all private networking. So unless you have port forwarding to go through, on and on and on, it can be a little bit difficult. But you can do this. So this is direct IP calling for anywhere. And to do that, you type in the IP address 172, and you're using the asterisk as the dot. So 172 and everybody's 16.207. And if I want to call somebody, I'll call Jim in the back. He'll be okay. I hit the menu button and I arrow down to direct IP call. Please don't call me. 172.16.207.145, and then I just hit the enter button and OK, and it should ring that person. The remote party's busy, and so, you know, Jim, are you on the phone or are you just ignoring me? You put on Do Not Disturb? Now it tells me it's coming from 145, so I know it's Jim, and I can answer it. Either I can put it on speaker. You there? I don't even hear you. I didn't hear you. Huh. The string and cup? Yeah. If you notice that it does say one new missed call, press up key to review. You do hit the up arrow, and it tells you where all your missed calls are. We're going to eventually get rid of that log, you know, for missed calls. And then you can hit back. It just goes back to where you were. If you want to clear that log, because otherwise it's just going to stay on the screen forever saying one missed call, you hit the up arrow key, and then you click clear all, and then it brings you back to your normal screen. Otherwise it's going to say a missed call. For some functions, you know, like at home or maybe your cell phone, that's not a bad idea to have a missed call. To say, hey, somebody tried to call me. Typically in an office environment, it's not a good idea because the way the ring groups are set up and hunt groups, you'd be ending up, you know, having hundreds of missed calls, and they were actually taken by somebody else. And, you know, you would think that you missed a call and you really didn't. I mean, the customer got through or the person got through. And so we're going to be working with that when we work with the individual accounts. So the quick IP mode is in fact a quicker way of entering this. Now the IP, direct IP calling can work anywhere in the world, so I can talk to any other IP device, a voice over IP device, like I said, anywhere. And as long as you have a direct IP connection, you can do that. The quick IP is a shorthand. You only have to type in a couple digits, but it only works in a local area network and only within where the first 3 octets are the same. So even if you were one large Class A network, all one physical LAN, you can only talk to devices that have the first 3 octets the same. Coincidentally, our room has the first 3 octets all the same, so it's going to work pretty well. To do that, what you do is you hit the pound sign, and then you hit just the last octet. So like 131. I missed the pound. So speaker, pound 131, and then you can hit the send button, and it should ring, you know, computer 131. Hello. So, and again, so you can pick up the phone and hit pound, you know, 123, and then hit send. And it, oh, there's no 23. There's 22. No 23. Pound 122. So that's the quick IP calling. Just like in computers, this is really how things started with networking. So we had personal computers that came out. The whole idea was they were personal computers. I want to be left alone. I don't want to be controlled. And suddenly we realized that not being controlled and not being connected is not a good thing. And we want to be connected. We lose that social aspect, that connection with other people. So that's how personal computers started networking, was peer-to-peer networking. And that's exactly what we're doing right now, is peer-to-peer networking. It's file sharing. Nobody has any higher control than anybody else. There's nothing centrally managing and controlling. Advantages, very easy to set up, nothing to do. You set up the computer, you share, and now you can access them. You know, is this very worthwhile on an enterprise level? Probably not. You know, could we use quick IP for calling, you know, accounting? Could. but we don't have any other features, we don't have other central control management or whatever. And it puts a lot of requirements on the individual user. So that's, again, the sort of the same benefits and disadvantages for peer-to-peer networking. So what's sort of the next progression then with networking? If we go from peer-to-peer, a server, and that'd be a client-server environment, right? Okay. In a Windows world, you can use Windows Server. We can use, any kind of operating system that's going to have a server operating system. We're going to do the same thing now, but it's going to be a voice over IP server that we're going to be installing. And that's where this software is going to be coming in handy. And hold on one second here. By the way, this is not something that you'll be able to do at home. To a certain extent, unless you do a lot of configuration, because we're using the classroom's IP addressing, because the phones are on that network. If I put you in a NATed network, which you can do, you're not going to have a phone to connect to because they're on two different networks. Later on, when we start talking about soft phones, then you can. Then you'll be able to do this to an extent at home as well. But again, you won't have the hard phone and you won't have the network addressing. You'd actually have to change your IP addressing of your server just to configure the NAT environment and so on. So if you do miss an activity, especially this first couple of weeks, you're going to have to come in and kind of make it up because it's going to be really important that you do follow along and keep up with that. Sort of depending on how far we get, I will be updating the learning plan. So if you do miss, check the learning plan of what we did cover, not what was intended to be covered, because in this class it's never quite the same. So because I intend one thing and something else happens, and that's just the way it happens. So, okay, who still waiting on some software? Who needs the software yet? Okay. Okay, so let's go through, and like I said, the client-server environment, let's go ahead and create the server. So I'm going to launch VMware Workstation. I don't need my phone for right now, so I'll just minimize that. Yes. Okay, so we will follow along. I will start it, get going, and sort of walk you through this step by step. Okay, I want to create a new virtual machine. And I just like using custom. I don't know why. I hardly ever change anything. I click next. I am using VMware Workstation 9. Everybody should have 9. Oh. Okay, so it's VMware Workstation 9, which is what we're using right now. Make sure you have the updates for home, though, if you do have anything, and then click next. I will install the operating system later. I'm not going to do the quick installer or whatever like that, so I'm basically building the box and then adding the operating system later on. So I will install the operating system later, and I click next. This is just a preference guide, so once you choose the specific operating system that you want to work with, it gives you some options, sort of recommended options, I should say, and it doesn't really matter what we choose, but to make it, technically correct, we're using Linux, and all of these systems, or I shouldn't say all of them, many of these free voice over IP servers run on top of CentOS. CentOS. Fortunately, we don't have to interact with it at all. It's just running underneath of it, and the appliance software runs on top of it, and that's what we interact with, is the graphical, web-based, whatever on top of that. Go ahead and click Next on CentOS. Now it says, oh, you want to be called CentOS. No, I don't want to be called CentOS. I want to be called Elastix. And Elastix is spelled with an X. And if you want to be more detailed, we're running version 2.3. And if you're thinking of doing multiple of these machines just for fun, you could put a 1 behind it, or a 2, or a 3, or whatever, or ABC. I'm just going to call it Elastix 2.3. What you call it doesn't make any difference. Where you put it is much more important. It has to be on your removable drive. If you put this on the C drive where it defaults to, it's gone at the end of class. unfortunately. So click Browse, and I look for my removable drive, which is my D drive, and then I have a separate folder just for virtual machines, and then I break up my virtual machines by class, so I have a network apps, and I will make a new folder, calling it Elastix 2.3. Okay, after I select this, I click OK, and I double check. Even the path isn't as critical as the drive letter. If it's on my D drive, I know I'm okay. Now, if the path looks really weird, yeah, go ahead and fix it, but at least I know it's on the right drive. If I install a virtual machine onto the wrong location, the wrong folder, that's easy to move. Putting it on the wrong drive isn't quite so easy to do because it won't be there. I click Next after I name it. It's amazing of how little resources these servers use. They really don't do a lot while they're functioning. So one processor is just fine. You can go up to what you're capable of doing. In my case, it's 8, but 1 is just fine. I click Next. It recommends, because I'm running CentOS, a gig of RAM, which really is plenty. But since we have so much RAM, why not use a little bit more of it? So I'm going to change it to 2 gigs. And then I click Next. Now this is another important step. Normally we choose natting for the purpose of being able to take it home, being able to take it to Gordy's room, the library, whatever, and have a consistent closed network world that we're working with in our own 192, 168, 118 network. Unfortunately, our server has to be on the same network as our phones. Our clients and the servers have to be the same network. So we have to use a bridge networking for this part of the class. So we're going to use bridge networking. So we're putting this server right on the school's network. So we're all going to be equal, servers out there hanging out. Along those lines, you will, because it's not natted, you're not protected, you do have access to other people's servers. Don't mess with them. Even if you think it's funny, don't change other people's servers. Don't create accounts, don't delete accounts, don't change passwords. That's just not cool, and it's very frustrating to the people who are trying to work on their stuff, and somebody's deliberately messing with them. So be careful, you know your address, that you are working with your server. So that's one downside of being bridged, because everybody's stuff is just hanging out there for the world to mess with. We're using all default passwords. You're all going to know each other's usernames and passwords. So again, just be appropriate, please. Click Next. These are a couple defaults, again, based on, because it's Linux, it's recommending an LSI Logic SCSI controller, whatever. And click Next. It's going to create a new virtual disk. So it's saying, what are you going to do for a hard drive? Are you going to use a physical one, use an existing disk, or create a new one? Obviously, we're going to create a new one, a new virtual disk. We don't need to have a physical disk for this. It recommends SCSI for whatever reason, and I'm fine with that. I don't even look at the drives. The drives are just storing my operating system and my data. And I click Next. Maximum disk size, it's saying 20 gigabytes, which is fine. The operating system is pretty small, the applications are pretty small, and we're not doing a lot. If this were a production system, this server would also hold people's voicemails. That can take up storage. So that would be where you would, in fact, have it much larger, so that people could be storing, tons of voicemails and lengthier voicemails or whatever. If you only have 20 gigs and you have 200 people, that doesn't leave a whole lot of room for people's voicemail boxes. You can either put it as a single file or multiple files. You really don't work with them anyway. It's just in a folder, and you work with the folder as a whole. So whether it's a single file or multiple files doesn't make any difference. I'm going to switch mine to a single file for this time. What you can call the virtual drive, the default name is fine. I click Next, and now I'm done. I built the machine. Here's the computer. Here's the systems, the options I chose for the system. Now I'm going to take and I need to insert the CD-ROM into the computer. So I go to the CD-DVD drive, and I'm essentially inserting the Elastix CD that I downloaded. And it's free for download. If you didn't get it from me, you can go to the Elastix site and you can download it and use it. Use the ISO image. I'm not using the physical disk, and I browse for it. And I need to find it. It's under my ISO images, voice over IP, and now these are the different images. Now, just clarifying, I think I gave you the 32-bit, correct? Does it say I386 on the end? Okay. We're not going over 4 gigs of RAM. That's the biggest advantage of going with the 64-bit. We're only using 2 gigs. And again, the processing powers are really, really minimal on this, so the 32-bit's fine. If you want to try the 64, go ahead and download it, or I can give it to you, and you can install it at some point as well. I just want to make sure that we're all using the same one in case there's just something a little different on them. And I click Open. And again, that's essentially the same as popping out the tray, putting the disk in, and closing it. Now I'm going to boot the computer, and it should boot to the disk. Power on the virtual machine. I just powered on the virtual machine. I inserted the CD-ROM, and I powered on the virtual machine. It comes up to a basic screen. To install or upgrade in graphical mode, press Enter. That sounds pretty good. If anybody is into the text mode stuff, you can type in Linux text and then hit Enter. Anybody up for that? Okay. I'm just going to hit Enter. And it's going to look like every other Linux or Unix installation that you've ever been through. Okay. Is everybody at English? No, not yet. Okay, we'll wait. Okay. Once everybody's at English, just go ahead and hit Enter because the OK is already highlighted. And the same thing for the keyboard. What kind of keyboard you have, and just select US. And it starts with the installation. The partition table on device SDA was unreadable. To create a new partition must be initialized. Do you want to do that now? Yes, I do. It's just like we're putting a new hard drive in. It's always going to ask you to initialize the hard drive. Windows Server does the exact same thing, and then you can partition it. Now, partitioning, these applications will often have their own partitioning, like their recommendations are built into the installer, so we don't have to worry about them too often. We're just going to choose the default. So installation requires partitioning your hard drive, and it says, use the free space. Are you okay with that? I am. I need to tab down to the OK. There we go. Tab down to the OK, and then click OK. So now we can look at the partitions and say, hey, how's it all set up? Sure, take a look at it once. And it's like, oh, okay. It made a vol group at 20 gigs and a vol 101 for a swap file. And then there's the X3 extension type and whatever it is. So when you're done looking at it, if it's just looking at it and seeing how they suggested it, we're not going to go through that at all. I just click back. Oh, I didn't want to click back. I just want to click OK. Sorry. Ultimately, you get to this screen that says, you want to review the layout? No. If you keep clicking the review and the layout, you just take it back to that screen and then back to here, back to the view screen and here. Ultimately, you have to say, no, I don't want to review this anymore. I want to move on. The mouse will not work. You have to tab. There is no mouse interaction. So when it said a graphical interface is kind of strong. It was very generous in its definition of graphical. It's blue and red with a little box-shaped thing. That's graphical, I guess. Would you like to configure the Ethernet network interface? I would like to do that, in fact. So I hit yes for doing that. And right now, right now it says activate on boot, so it's going to activate the network, but it's not going to activate any protocols. So I need to arrow down to enable IP version 4 support, and it also does IP version 6. We're not going to do IP version 6 because I don't think our phones support IP version 6, so it doesn't make any difference. But if you really want to give it an IP version 6 address, you're welcome to do that as well. Yes. Yes, you want to configure network interface, and that's going to bring you to this screen then. Get this here. Okay, so do you want to configure the Ethernet network? I want to click yes. Oh, to click in here. Yes. I want to make sure that I hit the space bar to enable IP version 4 support. If you don't do this, nothing's going to work. So you definitely have to have both of these checked. If you accidentally don't activate it on boot, you're going to have IP version 4, but you're not going to activate it. So the two really have to go hand in hand. No. I'm just reviewing in case somebody missed it. So that's okay. So I'm just making sure you have all these steps if you're checking your notes right now. Go ahead and click OK. A manual IP address. You make sure you hit the space bar on manual IP address, and then you are going to type in the IP address. And now in my case, it's 172.16.207.0 because my computer number is 0. Type in your computer number, 172.16.207.21, 31, 41, or 43, 44, 45, whatever it's going to be. Don't include leading zeros, though. The prefix, which is the subnet mask, you should have your notes from the phones, 255, 255, 240.0. Tab down to OK, and then the gateway. Oh, it deleted mine. So, okay. It's 172.16.192.1 is the default gateway, and then we're using the same ones as we use the phones for our primary DNS and our secondary DNS of 8.8.8.8 and 8.8.4.4. And then click OK, next. If your system is part of a large network, your host names are assigned by DHCP. Otherwise, select manually and enter your host name here. If you do not, your system will be known as localhost. We would actually have to configure DNS to have this all function out, and we're just not going to do that. We'll just call it. So we'll just call it localhost. So if you need to tab over to localhost, just type in localhost. Normally, it'd be nice to be working with servers with real names. So you can say like VoIP.go2ldc.edu or whatever, and that's how you configure your phones and everything. We just have too many systems and how they're connecting. And we're not using domain name services on campus for this, so it doesn't make any difference. We're using IP addresses for everything. So when you log on to the server, when you configure the server, when you connect your phone to the server, it's all using static IP addresses, the actual full static name, and click OK. We have a couple more screens to go through here. The system clock does not use the universal time convention or whatever that's called, so I want to tab down to the list of where I want to select basically my time zone. Once I tab down to the list of the Americas, I want to scroll up and I choose Chicago. America, Chicago is where we are. I checked and Cleveland, Wisconsin isn't on here. So I tried Manitowoc and Sheboygan. They're not there either. Neither is Green Bay. I'm not even sure if Milwaukee's on here. Milwaukee doesn't make it, so Chicago is our next best choice. Once I do that, I tab down to OK, and I hit OK. Password. Is password. It can be something fancy, it can be something creative, it can also be something easily forgotten. And again, if you don't have this, you're not getting in, and it just gets crazy. There'll be lots of passwords we're working with, and we're going to keep them all very, very simple and just call them password unless we need to set a special criteria of letters, numbers, or whatever. So it's during the installation right now. It's formatting it. It's installing some of the software and downloading stuff and just doing what it needs to be doing. So this would be a perfect time for a break. When we come back, we'll finish the rest of the installation with some of the applications and software. So this is a pretty typical install. I install the operating system, which is a big install, and then I configure all the services after it on top of it. So go ahead and take a break.